I'll give you my yacht if you can cross this current without asking for a tow.
"I'll give you my yacht if you cross that current without asking for a tow," shouted Marcus Hale, raising his champagne glass as the late afternoon wind whipped the flags of the Clearwater Pier. The sound of laughter mixed with the crash of waves against the white hull of the Aurora, his luxury yacht that reflected the golden sun like a living jewel. The crowd of guests, businessmen, influencers, heirs of everything and of nothing, applauded the theatrical gesture, filming with gleaming phones. In front of him, a thin man with sunburned skin and calloused hands wiped the sweat from his forehead with his forearm. Jacob Reed didn't laugh. He only looked at the churning sea, then faced Marcus with a calmness that unsettled him. "A yacht, is that right?" he asked, his voice firm, cutting through the laughter. "A yacht, yes, my friend," Marcus replied with a lazy, cruel smile. "The Aurora, 22 meters of pure power, worth more than anything you've ever touched in your life. If you cross that current alone, without calling for a tow, without help, it's yours. But if you fail, well, you'll stay right where you've always been." Some laughed. Others looked away, uncomfortable. The wind carried the scent of the sea mixed with the expensive perfume of the elite. Jacob placed his hands on the pier railing, studied the turbulent line of waves, and for a moment seemed to hear only the roar of the water. The seagulls screamed over the harbor, tearing through the orange sky. He took a deep breath. "Then I hope you can swim," he said, not with irony but conviction. Marcus's laughter stopped for a second. A murmur ran through the group. The billionaire slowly set down the glass, the crystal clinking against the metal. "Tomorrow at sunrise, in front of everyone," he said, measuring his opponent with his eyes. "We'll see if you're a man of your word, or just another broke fisherman craving attention." Jacob turned away, ignoring the flashes. The sound of a jet ski engine echoed in the distance, cutting through the tension but not dissolving it. Marcus watched the man walk toward the old boat moored farther down, a small vessel with peeling paint and an almost illegible name, Grace. A stronger gust blew, and a spray of seawater hit the billionaire's jacket, making him step back. Discreet laughter rippled, too quick to catch, but he noticed. He wiped his face with a handkerchief, pretending nothing had happened. "Tomorrow he drowns," he muttered low to the aide beside him. "If he doesn't give up first," the man replied, hesitant. As the guests dispersed, a local reporter's camera was still rolling. The microphone captured the sound of the sea and the murmur of indignation among the fishermen watching from afar. Jacob disappeared among the boats, and the sky began to darken. On the horizon, distant lightning flickered, as if the sea itself foresaw what was coming. Marcus stayed there, staring at the gleaming yacht. He ran his hand over the hull with possessive pride. It was more than a vessel. It was a symbol of power, of status, of control. And he couldn't stand being challenged by someone who met his eyes without fear. "Make sure you film everything," he told his private cameraman. "I want every second. People love stories of courage until the hero sinks." The aide nodded. The pier lights began to turn on, casting reflections on the sea. Marcus walked to the end of the platform, the sound of his leather shoes blending with the ropes striking the masts. In the bar nearby, a few fishermen muttered among themselves, recalling old stories about that current. "That stretch swallows even boats with new engines," said one. Another shook his head, looking toward the billionaire. "That man doesn't know what the sea is. He thinks everything has a price." Later, already in his glass suite at the resort, Marcus watched the challenge video over and over, savoring his own audacity. Every frame seemed to confirm what he believed, that the world belonged to the bold, to those rich enough to turn humiliation into spectacle. Outside, the waves crashed harder against the rocks. The wind blew from the east, a warning of a coming storm. Meanwhile, on the silent dock, Jacob worked on his boat with steady hands, tightened bolts, replaced the motor belt, tied the rudder with new ropes. He listened to the distant sound of the resort's party and the crack of waves against the hull, like a beating heart. With each movement, his face showed the serenity of a man who had faced tides worse than the pride of a rich man. Near midnight, he lit a cigarette and looked out at the Black Sea. In the reflection of the water, he saw the lights of the Aurora, motionless and arrogant, just like its owner. A seagull landed on the mast and watched him. Jacob smiled faintly. "Tomorrow, boy," he murmured. "Tomorrow he'll understand what the sea does to those who challenge it." The distant sound of thunder answered, and high up in the resort, Marcus Hale drank alone on the balcony, whispering softly, like a vow. Tomorrow, I'll show the difference between men and dreamers. The sun hadn't yet torn through the horizon when the deep rumble of the sea took over the pier. The water pounded the pilings with uneven force, and the wind carried the smell of an approaching storm. Marcus Hale arrived surrounded by cameras, bodyguards, and onlookers. He wore a light blazer, mirrored sunglasses, and that smile of someone who believes the world is his stage. Behind him, the yacht Aurora gleamed, white and arrogant, while Jacob Reed's small boat rocked alone, like a reminder of what it means to be human. "Come on, Reed," Marcus shouted, raising a megaphone. "The sea doesn't wait for cowards." People laughed, the sound slicing through the wind. Journalists crowded in, microphones ready, drones buzzing over the dock. The sun began to rise, painting the sea red-orange, and in that light, there was something of an omen. Jacob, in worn-out pants and a soaked jacket, tightened the knot on the mast and answered only with a gesture. He raised his hand, steady, without looking at Marcus. It was a simple gesture, but it provoked a brief, strange silence, as if the sea itself had held its breath. "Ready to die, Reed?" the billionaire taunted, smiling. "Only those who live in fear talk that much about death," Jacob replied, without turning. A murmur spread through the crowd. Marcus hid his irritation with a loud, artificial laugh. He loved attention, needed it. He pointed toward the current ahead, a darker strip of water where the waves clashed and spun like blades. "There, cross and come back, that's all." The Grace's engine sputtered once, twice, until it finally caught, spitting bluish smoke. The sound echoed through the dock, raw, almost primitive, contrasting with the smooth purr of the yachts nearby. Seagulls circled overhead, screaming as if announcing danger. The small boat began to move away slowly, creaking, leaving behind a foamy trail. Marcus raised his glass, toasting with his aide. "The people's hero is on his way to the slaughter," he said quietly with a dry smile. The wind strengthened. The waves struck harder, and the current seemed alive, waiting for Jacob to meet it. The crowd murmured. Some local fishermen shook their heads, whispering that no one crossed that stretch alone. The Tampa Bay TV journalist narrated excitedly, "We're following Jacob Reed's attempt to cross the Clearwater Current, a challenge issued yesterday by billionaire Marcus Hale, owner of Hale Resorts." The boat neared the point where the sea changed color. Jacob held the rudder steady, his muscles tight as rope. The bow plunged into a wave, the deck tilted, and cold water exploded over him. The crowd screamed. The sound of the current was like a beast's roar. Jacob strapped himself to the seat with a leather belt and kept going, eyes fixed on the horizon. Marcus watched through binoculars, fingers tapping the pier's railing. "He won't last 5 minutes," he said confidently. But the reporter beside him replied, eyes still on the water, "He's lasted longer than anyone expected." The billionaire smiled, annoyed. Hope is the pastime of the weak. Out at sea, the Grace fought as if it had a will of its own. The waves hurled it sideways. The engine roared and sputtered. Water poured into the hull, and Jacob bailed it out with desperate rhythm like a war drum. His fingers bled, but he didn't stop. Each breath was a battle against the wind. Then a crack, sharp and loud. The main rudder rope snapped. The boat spun, thrown sideways. The crowd gasped. Marcus let out a short laugh, the sound cutting like a blade. "There it is," he shouted. "It's over." But Jacob, instead of giving up, grabbed the broken bar and tied it with his belt. A desperate improvisation. The boat realigned, shaky but steady. A woman in the crowd began clapping, alone. Others joined. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Time began to distort. Minutes stretched into hours. The sun climbed, the wind grew stronger. The reporter's voice trembled with emotion. "He's still out there. Jacob Reed is still standing." Marcus snorted. "It's useless stubbornness. The sea always wins." The aide tried to smile, but something in his expression betrayed unease. The crowd no longer laughed. They were hypnotized, transfixed by the tiny image of the boat defying the violence of the water. Jacob turned his head once, his expression calm, determined, almost at peace. The sky changed. A dark cloud crossed the sun, the golden light turned grey, and the sea turned to lead. The wind suddenly shifted north, tearing off hats and flipping cups. The first drops of rain hit Marcus's face. He looked up, disoriented, as if the weather had betrayed him. "Stop this!" he shouted, but no one heard. Everyone was staring at the sea. A massive wave rose on the horizon, tall as a wall. Jacob's boat climbed, vanished for an instant. Then nothing. Silence. Even the wind seemed to stop breathing. Marcus lowered the binoculars. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the pier. "I told you," he muttered, but his voice cracked. The aide tried to speak, but there was no time. A scream tore through the air. Someone pointed toward the water. Far out, a shadow reappeared among the waves. The engine coughed, spitting smoke. The boat was still moving. Jacob was alive. Marcus Hale, pale, swallowed hard as the crowd erupted. The storm was growing. The sea hadn't finished speaking. The rain fell as if the sky had torn open. The sound was deafening, a constant thunder mixed with the roar of the waves. The Grace rose and fell like an abandoned toy, but Jacob Reed kept the rudder steady. His body bent, eyes burning with salt and rage. Every movement of the boat felt like a punch from the sea. He was no longer fighting only against the current, but against something greater. The arrogance of a man who thought he could buy everything, even other people's courage. On the pier, Marcus Hale pressed the binoculars to his face, his fingers trembling. The wind whipped his suit, his hair plastered to his forehead. He tried to smile for the journalists, but the smile was a cracked mask. "This proves nothing," he shouted, but his own voice was lost in the gale. The sea rose in liquid mountains. The boat's engine faltered in short intervals, coughing, dying, and coming back to life. Jacob felt the hull vibrate like an old heart, almost giving up. He tied the tiller with a rope and ran to the deck, grabbing the torn canvas that flapped in the wind. Using a knife, he cut pieces and turned the fabric into an improvised sail. The wind struck hard, inflating it like a lung. The boat responded, gaining strength. A drone camera captured the scene, streaming it live on the pier's screens. The crowd erupted. A fisherman shouted, "He's turning! He's coming back!" And the people broke into applause. Rain ran down their faces, but no one left. Something had changed. They no longer laughed at Jacob as they were rooting for him. Marcus threw the binoculars to the ground, the glass shattering. "Turn the cameras off," he ordered, shoving the operator. "Enough of this." "I can't," the man stammered. "It's being broadcast live. The world is watching." The word hit him squarely. World. Marcus looked around and realized he no longer controlled anything. The crowd, once complicit, now ignored him. Everyone was staring at the sea, where the small boat fought for every meter. Jacob felt his body giving out. The cold was a blade cutting through his chest. His breathing came in ragged gasps. His hands had no strength left. Even so, he laughed between his teeth, a hoarse, defiant laugh. "Come on, old man, just a little more," he muttered, speaking to the boat as if it were a friend. Thunder exploded nearby. The sky flashed white. Lightning struck the sea a few meters away, and the wave that followed tossed him sideways. Jacob was thrown against the mast, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. For a second, everything went silent. He opened his eyes and saw the sea spinning around him. The boat tilted, water pouring in. He coughed, spat blood, and grabbed the bar. On the pier, someone screamed, "He's going to sink." Marcus tried to hold his composure. He chose this. I didn't force him, but his voice no longer sounded confident. It was defensive, weak. The reporter turned to him, microphone trembling. "Do you see what you've done?" she asked. "What if he dies?" "He won't die," Marcus said, but his eyes betrayed fear. Out at sea, the Grace rocked, slipped sideways, and then, in an almost miraculous strike, the improvised sail caught the right wind. The boat straightened, spitting out the water inside. Jacob gripped the tiller with both hands, shouting something the wind carried away. The crowd on the pier erupted in applause. Marcus looked toward the sea and for the first time felt something he didn't recognize. Envy. That man alone, facing what he himself would never have the courage to face. The anger mixed with discomfort, and the facade of superiority began to crumble. He turned his back, pretending to answer a phone call, but his hands trembled too much to hold the device. Jacob looked to the horizon and saw the pier, distant, almost invisible. The sky was beginning to clear between the clouds. He knew he was still far from winning, but he had already crossed the worst. With every meter gained, every wave overcome, he felt his dignity return like an inner fire. Now the sea seemed to respect him. The waves no longer struck him down. They tested him. The wind blew from the side, pushing the Grace toward the shore. Jacob closed his eyes for a moment and let the boat follow its course. On the pier, the crowd watched in silence. The reporter lowered her microphone, moved. "He's coming back," she whispered. Marcus leaned over the railing, soaked, eyes fixed on the horizon. "He won't make it all the way," he muttered to himself. "He'll break before that." But the Grace kept moving. Each meter gained was an open wound in Marcus Hale's pride. The crowd began chanting Jacob's name. "Jacob! Jacob!" The sound spread like a wave of energy, and the billionaire felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Exhausted, Jacob lifted his gaze. He saw the distant pier, the vibrating silhouettes, the sound of voices carried by the wind, and even without strength he smiled. The sea was no longer an enemy. It was a witness. A drone captured the exact moment he raised his fist silently toward the sky. The gesture spread across the screens and ignited the internet. Hashtags appeared. Thousands were watching live. Marcus Hale's name was beginning to be mentioned with contempt. The billionaire tried to speak to his aide, but no one listened. All eyes were on the sea. A sharp sound sliced the air. The boat's engine coughed, then died. Jacob looked at the panel, the gauge dropping. The fuel was running out. He smiled in disbelief and muttered through clenched teeth, "Of course, right now." The boat moved only by wind, without power, without guarantee. But it moved. The Grace drifted slowly, driven only by the improvised sail. The rain stopped. The sea calmed. The sun broke through the clouds, and Marcus Hale shuddered, realizing that the impossible was still happening. "Prepare the prize," ordered Marcus Hale, his voice firm but falsely calm, trying to hide the panic rising in his throat. "If he wants a show, he'll get one." The security guards exchanged uneasy glances. The crowd cheered, shouting Jacob's name as the boat moved slowly through the waves. Cameras captured every second. Drones hovered above like digital vultures. Marcus ran a hand through his wet hair and smiled for the lenses, the stiff smile of a man trying to reverse defeat. "Do you all see what I see?" he said to the TV reporter, stepping closer with an air of control. "It's madness, isn't it? A simple man facing the power of the ocean. Thanks to me, I gave him a chance to be remembered." The reporter held the microphone steady, her eyes cold. "Do you think this is about fame?" Marcus blinked, surprised by her tone. "Everything is about fame," he replied, laughing, "and about who pays the bill." The people around him fell silent. His laugh echoed oddly misplaced, a wrong sound amid the storm. A distant thunder interrupted him, and the wind began to blow harder again. Jacob was less than 500 meters from the pier, still standing. The boat looked like a ghost, but it kept moving. Marcus gripped his aide's shoulder. "Turn off the cameras, it's enough." "I can't, sir. It's on open broadcast. It's already gone viral." The word hit him like a punch. Viral. Control was slipping through his fingers like wet sand. He looked around and realized that for the first time, he wasn't the center of the spectacle. He was the villain of a story he hadn't written. Out at sea, Jacob battled the final wall of current. The wind pushed the boat backward. His body no longer obeyed, but he didn't give in. The veins in his neck bulged. The sea roared. The crowd screamed louder and louder, and that chorus seemed to push him forward. Desperate, Marcus tried to regain control. He climbed onto the makeshift stage, grabbed the sound crew's microphone, and raised his voice above the wind. "This challenge isn't about hate or class, it's about courage. I, Marcus Hale, believe in merit. That man is out there because he had the chance that many wouldn't." The crowd responded with boos. The reporter stepped closer, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. "He doesn't need your approval, Mr. Hale. He needs you to keep your word." Marcus fell silent. The camera zoomed in, capturing the slight tremor at the corner of his mouth. His wounded pride turned into pure rage. "He won't make it," he whispered to himself. "The sea will take care of it." But the sea didn't. Jacob broke through the last wave. The Grace rose, the hull slicing the surface like a scar. The voices turned into shouts of celebration. The fisherman was just meters from the pier, and the impossible now had a face. Marcus's heart pounded. He turned to a guard. "Prepare the yacht. I want it spotless. Don't let that man touch it." The guard hesitated. "Sir, there are cameras everywhere. I pay your salary, do as I say." But it was too late. People had started filming the argument. The reporter was broadcasting live. Marcus Hale's facade of control was collapsing in front of millions of viewers. He tried to recover his tone. "Everyone, calm down. I'm a man of my word. But first, we need to make sure he's safe. Safety comes first." The crowd roared in rejection. The boos became chants. "Keep your promise, keep your promise." The sound echoed off the resort walls and the pier's loudspeakers. The aide, pale, leaned toward him. "Sir, stop. The more you talk, the worse it gets." Marcus looked out at the sea and saw Jacob advancing slowly, the damaged boat still sailing. It destroyed him. Public humiliation was now unavoidable. He took off his glasses, threw them to the ground, and drew a deep breath. The sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the boat. Her golden beam crossed the water and fell upon Jacob as if the very day were saluting him. The crowd applauded and someone began to cry. Marcus clenched his fists. "It's just a trick of the light," he muttered. But he knew it wasn't. The sea, the wind, time itself, everything seemed to conspire for that moment to exist. Jacob looked toward the pier, exhausted. His beard was soaked, his lips blue, but his eyes were firm. Close enough now to hear the clapping, he released the tiller and let the boat drift, carried by the wind's strength. The vessel touched the pier gently, as if the ocean itself were returning him. Silence fell. The sound of ropes hitting the mast was the only noise. Jacob stood, staggering, and stepped off the boat. His feet hit the wood. It groaned under his weight. No one moved. Marcus stared at him, jaw locked, eyes red. Jacob approached. His clothes dripped, his body trembled, but his voice came out steady. "Keep your word." Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The crowd began shouting again, this time in unison, like a tidal wave of voices pushing him backward. "Keep your word." He took a step back. The sound of distant sirens mixed with applause. Marcus Hale stood motionless, drenched, his face tense, and Jacob Reed stood before him, waiting for justice. The wind blew, the yacht Aurora swayed, and destiny changed direction. The wind died down. The storm, exhausted, began to retreat. The sea, which minutes ago had roared like a beast, now breathed heavily, slowly, in gentle waves. The silence on the pier was thick, almost solid. Only the dripping of water from life vests, the creak of wet wood, and the distant click of cameras could be heard. Jacob Reed stood before Marcus Hale, his hands still trembling, his body bent, but his gaze steady. There was no hatred in his eyes, only an old certainty, heavy as the salt clinging to his skin. Behind him the broken boat swayed slowly, as if waiting for the ending. Marcus opened his mouth, searching for something to say. The crowd, once curious, was now a silent tribunal. Every look was a verdict. The reporter stepped forward with her microphone, but Jacob raised his hand, asking for silence. "I don't want a speech," he said, his voice hoarse. "I just want you to keep your word." The sentence fell like a stone into the water. The waves carried its echo to the edges of the pier. Marcus blinked rapidly, trying to contain his panic. He looked around, searching for support. None of his bodyguards moved. Even his aide stood still, avoiding eye contact. "Of course," he said finally, forcing a smile. "Of course I'll keep my word. I'm a man of honor. There are protocols, you understand. Transfer of ownership, legal papers, costs, taxes." The crowd reacted with muffled boos. A group of young people started filming up close, streaming everything live. Hashtags began popping up on screens. The sound of notifications blended with the murmur of the sea. Marcus realized that every second of hesitation was another brick crumbling from the castle of his image. Jacob just looked at him. He didn't reply, didn't shout. He simply stood there, his body firm like a mast. That calm was the greatest insult of all. Marcus tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. "Listen, man. It was a joke, a symbolic gesture." Jacob took a step forward. "A joke." The word came slowly, sharp. "Then, was the sea joking with me out there too?" The crowd erupted in applause and whistles. The reporter turned to the camera, moved. The man who faced the current now faces power. Marcus wiped his face, despair hiding behind a forced smile. All right, we'll settle this." He called to his aide. "Prepare the contract, quickly." The aide shook his head. "Sir, it's not yours anymore." "What did you say?" Marcus frowned. "The yacht." The man swallowed hard. "Your account was frozen 20 minutes ago. Stocks crashed. Your partners pulled their investments. It's all over the news." Marcus turned pale. The sounds around him faded away. He stood still, as if the world had vanished. The reporter received confirmation through her earpiece. "It just came through," she said, looking at him. "Marcus Hale under investigation for tax fraud and corporate corruption." The crowd murmured. The shouts turned into a mix of surprise and satisfaction. The sea seemed to vibrate with the sound. Jacob kept his gaze on him, not gloating, not mocking, just waiting. Marcus staggered back a step. His pride, once towering, now weighed on him like an anchor. "This is a setup," he muttered. "I still own all of this." Jacob pointed to the yacht Aurora. "Then prove it. Climb aboard and take what you claim is yours." The billionaire looked at the boat, gleaming under the sun, surrounded by cameras and people who no longer believed in him. For a moment he seemed to consider it, but his legs wouldn't move. He remained there, frozen on the pier like a drenched statue. The silence spread again, deeper, heavier this time. Jacob took a deep breath and turned away. He began walking toward the boat, each slow step marked by the sound of wet boots hitting the wood. The crowd parted respectfully. The reporter followed him, her voice low, almost reverent. "Mr. Reed, what do you plan to do now that you've won?" He looked at the sea, then at the yacht, and replied without looking at the camera, "What I've always done. Work. Only now the sea knows my name." His words drifted through the wind and settled over the crowd like a shroud. Marcus in the background looked smaller now, folded over the weight of his own ruin. The sound of a vibrating phone broke the silence. It was the aide, pale, showing Marcus the screen, a notification reading, "Asset freeze." The billionaire took a shaky breath and muttered, "This can't be happening." Jacob, already aboard the yacht, untied the ropes slowly. The sea received him without resistance. The boat drifted away, and the sun's reflection shone on the water, splitting Marcus's face in two, half shadow, half light. The crowd began to applaud, but there was no euphoria. It was a calm, respectful applause. Jacob didn't wave, didn't look back. The wind pushed the Aurora toward the open sea, and every meter of distance was a sentence carried out. The sirens approached with a metallic wail that blended with the sound of the waves. The crowd was still there, hypnotized, watching the man who just a few hours earlier had ruled everything, now on his knees, covered in salt, his face gray. Marcus Hale said nothing. He just stared into emptiness. A reporter's camera moved in slowly, capturing every detail. The crooked tie, the diamond ring still glinting on his finger, the trembling hands. Jacob Reed was already back on the pier, his body exhausted, but his gaze calm. There was no pride, no anger. Only that kind of dignity that can't be bought, the calm of someone who owes nothing to the world. "Mr. Hale," said a police officer, stepping forward, "we have a federal warrant for financial investigation. We'll need you to come with us." The words fell like lead. The crowd, which had been shouting minutes earlier, now watched in absolute silence. The click of cameras replaced speech. Marcus tried to stand, but his legs failed. Two agents took him by the arms. "This is a mistake," he muttered. "I have lawyers, I have influence." The officer replied flatly, "You don't have anything anymore." The words echoed. Marcus Hale's world was collapsing from the inside out. On the other side, a reporter narrated live. "At this moment, businessman Marcus Hale is being detained on suspicion of tax fraud, money laundering, and active corruption. The investigation began after internal reports. The aide, the same man who had always followed him in silence, was seen handing a flash drive to the authorities. The crowd murmured. Marcus stared at him, betrayed. "You—" The man took a deep breath. "I just did what I should have done a long time ago." Marcus tried to respond, but the sound of the sea drowned his voice. The wind blew from the south, carrying the sharp smell of salt water. The Aurora, now Jacob's property, rocked gently in the distance, its soaked flags hanging low, as if the yacht itself understood the gravity of the moment. The reporter, still broadcasting live, approached Jacob. "Did you imagine all of this would happen?" He looked at the sea before answering. "No one imagines what the sea decides to do. It gives back what's fair, in its own way." The crowd erupted in applause, not euphoric applause, but recognition. That simple man had won without shouting, without humiliating, just by enduring. Marcus, handcuffed, lifted his head and shouted, "He provoked me! You don't understand! I gave him a chance! I made him someone!" But no one answered. The sound of his voice was swallowed by the wind, and the cameras no longer followed him. They were all on Jacob. A man approached the fisherman, one of Marcus's investors, in an expensive suit, his face heavy with guilt. He extended his hand to Jacob. "I want to apologize. I was part of this. I went along with him." Jacob hesitated, looked at the outstretched hand, and after a second, shook it. Then, start differently. The image went around the world. The photo of the two men shaking hands, with Marcus Hale being led away in the background, would become a symbol of a new kind of victory. Quiet, clean, inevitable. As the agents escorted him away, Marcus looked one last time at the sea. The sun was setting, painting the water in red and gold. The reflection of the aurora shimmered, and for an instant he saw himself there, not as a powerful man, but as a shadow over a mirror that rejected him. "The sea always wanted to be mine," he murmured almost to himself, "but I never learned to listen." Jacob, standing on the pier, watched everything. A group of children came closer, asking to see the boat. He smiled, nodded, and led them to the edge of the platform. "Careful with the hull," he said. "It's what saved me." The aide, now free of fear, approached timidly. "Jacob, the yacht is really yours. All the paperwork's in your name. The court confirmed it." He simply nodded. "I don't want anything that shines more than the water." The man smiled, puzzled. "Then what are you going to do with it?" Jacob looked at the aurora, silent and immense beneath the sunset. "I don't know yet, but the sea will tell me." The shouts of reporters returned, no longer for Marcus but for the new headline that had just broken. Hale Foundation dissolved, assets redirected to coastal community. Marcus Hale was taken away in silence, the sound of the handcuffs clinking like distant bells. Jacob stayed on the pier until the last reflection vanished from the sea. The wind blew softly, cold, gentle, almost a thank you. The next morning the sea was quiet, the kind of silence that only comes after something important, as if the ocean itself needed to rest. The surface reflected Florida's clear sky, and the yacht, Aurora, swayed gently at the dock, different, lighter. The reporters were gone, the onlookers too. Only Jacob Reed remained, sitting at the edge of the pier, staring at the vessel that was now officially his. There was no glimmer of triumph in his eyes. The man who had faced the current didn't look victorious. He looked at peace. Beside him a cup of coffee sat forgotten, growing cold. His calloused hands rested on his knees. He watched the reflection of the water, moving in slow waves that resembled breaths. With each ripple, he saw the faces of those who had laughed at him, the sound of the crowd's voices on the pier, Marcus Hale's expression before he realized it was over. He remembered the words spoken, and the ones he chose not to say. The sea had given everything back to him, but in a way no contract could ever express. A shadow approached from behind. It was the boy who had filmed the challenge on his phone, the same one who had posted the first video that went viral. "Mr. Reed," he asked shyly, "can I see the boat?" Jacob turned his head and smiled faintly. "Sure, but take your shoes off before you step aboard. The sea respects those who tread lightly." The boy obeyed, walking onto the deck, amazed at the yacht's size. "Are you going to sell it?" he asked. "Or live here?" Jacob shook his head. "Neither." Just then the sound of footsteps echoed on the dock. It was the Tampa Bay TV reporter, carrying a microphone and a different expression, less journalistic, more human. "Jacob," she called, approaching. "Sorry to bother you. The whole country wants to know what you'll do with the Aurora." He chuckled softly, without irony. "The whole country should worry more about those who don't even have a boat to fish from." She lowered the microphone, embarrassed but curious. "And you? What will you do now?" Jacob stood slowly. His body still ached, but his stance was firm, calm. "The sea has already given me what I needed. Now it's my turn to give back." He walked to the yacht and climbed aboard. The boards creaked beneath his feet. He touched the helm, feeling the cold metal. The wood still carried the scent of gasoline and salt, and for the first time he truly smiled. In the days that followed, the headlines shifted. Marcus Hale's scandal became a formal case. His companies collapsed one by one. The image of the handcuffed billionaire spread around the world, his name becoming synonymous with punished arrogance. Meanwhile, Jacob Reed, the fisherman who faced the sea, became a symbol of courage and integrity. TV networks sought him out, but he refused interviews. He only said, "The current isn't a place for fame." 3 weeks later, Jacob donated the yacht Aurora, to a community sailing school in Clearwater. The children who had once watched from the beach now learned to navigate on the very boat that had once symbolized arrogance. He personally handed over the keys under quiet applause as the sea mirrored the blue sky. As the sails were raised for the first time, Jacob stood at the end of the dock, watching the yacht drift away with the young sailors aboard. The wind blew softly, as if in thanks. The flag fluttered, and the white reflection of the boat sliced the sea like a line of light. The reporter present at the farewell asked in a low voice, "And you? What do you feel seeing all this?" He thought for a moment before answering, his gaze lost on the horizon. "I feel that the sea has forgiven. And that man has learned to swim in his own pride." Later, alone, Jacob walked to the end of the pier. The sun was setting again, gilding everything around him. He picked up a smooth stone, threw it into the sea, and watched the waves open in circles. "Thank you," he murmured, not to the sea but to the silence that remained. Far away in the cold cells of the county jail, Marcus Hale watched the scene on the prison television. The volume was low. The reporter said, "The yacht donated by Jacob Reed will be used to teach underprivileged youth how to sail. The boat's new name has been officially registered as Karma." Marcus kept his eyes on the screen. For a moment, his lips moved as if he wanted to laugh, but no sound came out. He only pressed his forehead against the cold window glass, the reflection of the sunset coloring his tired face. Across town, Jacob gathered the ropes of the Grace, the old boat that had never abandoned him. He ran a hand over the hull and whispered, "It's still you that carries me, partner." The wind lifted his hair and the sea answered with a calm wave, softly striking the pier. Everything was in balance. As he pulled away, the sound of the Grace's old engine filled the air. The boat moved slowly, cutting through the reflection of the twilight. No applause, no music, just the sea, and a man who had won without needing to defeat anyone. If this story made you feel something, anger, relief, justice, then you're already part of what we tell here. Every week, a new true story of turnaround, of karma, of ordinary people facing the impossible. Subscribe now and turn on the bell, because here, no one goes unpunished. Here, destiny always comes back to collect.